Welcome to Economics Happy Hour. My name's Matt,
And my name is Jadrian.
and it is late March 2025. When this drops, it is spring break 2025 as we're recording. How has spring break been going for you?
Very good. I took a little vacation to Pittsburgh. That's what I was gonna have for my beer, but I think I left the beer I threw it in the freezer to try to get it nice and cold, and I may have left it in the freezer too long.
Uh,
I may have a beer slushy with you today, but it's been
hey,
good. It's been a
good.
nice, relaxing couple days.
Very cool. Very cool. Anything noteworthy in Pittsburgh? Just
No, just
relax it a couple days.
relaxing, hanging out with friends.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was. I love Pittsburgh. I have not been back in a long time
Yeah.
since I moved, and so it's been good to. It was good to go back.
It's funny, I could have caught up with you because I was in West Virginia in Morgantown, which I don't know if that's exactly on your drive.
It is. I drive right
Or-
through Morgantown, actually.
yeah, I was there for a couple days earlier this week. So,
We
uh,
really should have planned this better. That's on me. You told me that you were going to be in Morgantown, and I just completely forgot about it.
well, you might have mentioned Pittsburgh. So, same thing. Life is busy. Life is busy. So, what are you drinking other than we know potentially a beer slushy?
It's definitely going to be a beer slushy, and I might have to go. I don't know what this is going to taste like, so I
Yeah,
might go get one of the other 4 packs. I got a 4 pack at a brewery, and I might go
very
get one
cool.
of the other ones and just have a slightly cool beer. I
Very
had
cool.
this beer the first time. I don't know if I ever told you about it. I don't know if I may have drank this with you on the podcast when I
Okay.
moved down from State College to Blacksburg. One of the very last places do you remember this story? The last place I ate before I left State College?
Don't remember the story.
I almost gave it away when I was holding this beer up. One of my favorite restaurants that I also deeply miss is Permane Brothers. I
Okay.
absolutely love those sandwiches. And I stopped at a Permane Brothers in Altoona, and they were selling um, almost famous pickle beer that they partnered with a brewery out of Pittsburgh. It is a cucumber gosa, is actually
Oh,
what it is. So it's a cucumber sour. No, Matt, they're really good. That's why I'm okay with this being a slushy. I think it'll actually be okay.
that'll be
Um,
cool. Maybe who knows?
so
Maybe you will invent a new product for them. So,
I enjoyed it, and so when I was in Pittsburgh, the place I was staying was very close to their brewery. So I went back, I had some of their other beers, and then was talking to the bartender about how I had tried the pickle beer, and he goes, "Oh, we make a new one every year, so it always tastes a little different." So I got that, and then I'm also going with some spicy ranch pretzel chips to
very
go along with
cool.
it. So
Very
well
cool.
themed.
I am going outside the box today for us. I guess you could take that literally if you think I ever buy boxed wine, but I have a Catalonian wine.
Okay,
Posia?
why wine?
I don't know. It feels like the bottle's open, feels like it's a day for a little bit of
It
wine. I
does
don't
it
know.
does feel really nice outside, which is why I was happy to pour this beer. I'm not going to check this in because I'm fairly confident that I have destroyed the integrity of this beer by half freezing it.
You
But
have another one that you can check in later at least?
I got a 4 pack of it.
Yeah, there we go. There
So
we go.
I'll check in I want to make sure that it is different than the last one. This one's definitely lighter, but it's almost like when you have a cucumber water where like
Mhm.
you're like, yeah, there's a little something in there. That's what this tastes like. It's not super sour, but it has the dill, the cucumber.
Yeah,
I
very
like
cool.
them.
Very cool. Well, cheers.
Cheers, Matt. I'm gonna be a
Clinton.
slob and chew on pretzels while we talk.
No, no, no worries, no worries. The mic is good. We don't even hear it. So, um, well, we're changing it up again. A few episodes ago, spent the time talking to Jadrian about his research, and we decided we would flip things, and you would be asking me about my research, putting me on
Well,
the
so
spot on
I
things.
I'm excited for this because you have had I'll say a real pivot in your career over the past 20, 30 years. And I think that
Yeah,
pivot is so much fun. So part of the questions I'm going to ask you, I will ask you about like individual, maybe not
sure.
necessarily
Whatever.
papers because
Yeah.
you have streams of papers that are around the same thing.
Yep.
But I'm very curious about your pivot. Matt was essentially an experimental economist when he
Yeah.
started, and I think today people know you as more of a pop culture economist.
It's
I'll say
probably true.
more, right? You still do
Yeah, I
experimental
think that's
stuff.
fair.
So I will say this is a two-part question. I would love to hear more about your cigarette-related research, cigarette packaging, health warnings, experimental stuff, because you have a bunch of really cool papers
Yeah.
in that space. Because I think that's not that your other papers are not surprising results, but that I always find sort of the before we started to hop on here, we briefly mentioned talking about syntaxes,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
these are to me these are really fun topics because I think they get into the sort of the fun ideas. What role should the government have in discouraging cigarette consumption, right? We know that this
Sure.
is a bad thing. And so I feel like these topics are really interesting. So if you would talk about some of your cigarette warning package
Yeah.
label stuff, and then I'll transition and ask you the more recent stuff later.
Sure, sure. Yeah, started in experiments in grad school on food products because I went to a school not that dissimilar from Washington State and Iowa State, where there's just a huge ag econ presence, and ended up kind of getting into agricultural economics, not because I ever thought I would go into ag econ, but you go to a place and you're like, oh, okay, if I start to do agricultural economics research, I can get a good job. And that was essentially my thought process on that. And so I did experiments, ended up getting into cigarettes when somebody who
Cigarette
was a
research.
cigarette
Cigarette research.
research, not actual cigarettes, not actual cigarettes. James Thrasher was in the Research Triangle area. I think he was at UNC Chapel Hill when I was at RTI, and he heard about me running auctions, and we got together, and he had the idea for doing this for cigarettes. And we did a really cheap one in Mexico, and it actually got a lot of publicity where we put grotesque warning labels on cigarettes and ran the experiments to see how did it affect demand. And it turns out if you put a grotesque warning, at least in an experimental setting, the bids were reduced. Smokers were not willing to pay quite as much for those on average. And what was kind of cool about that, the Mexican government actually cited that in some of their policy briefings. So some of the cigarette research has actually been cited by governments as they've
Mhm.
changed cigarette rules. And then there's been a number of other things related to cigarettes over time. The public health community has grant funding, which
Yeah.
helped us
Okay.
get money to do these things. So how would smokers, what would their preferences be for smokeless tobacco was one set of research. What would it be for e-cigarettes when e-cigarettes were emerging like a decade ago? And what would happen for US consumers if we put these grotesque images, which, if you're just from the US, you might not know what we're talking about if you haven't gone to foreign countries, but in many countries, there are incredibly nasty images on cigarettes. Like this is what
Mhm.
a lung of somebody who
Yeah.
smoked looked like, and it's just horrible. Or this is mouth cancer caused by smoking, and it's pretty bad. So wide, a lot of those different types of studies, there's funding available. It was using experiments. When you're running research, often, how do you get funding to do the research you'd like to do?
Mhm.
We were able to find some interesting results, also work on some things with experimental auctions and figure out how those worked. And that was a lot of the research I did, I guess, probably for a good decade or so. I mean, I would think the cigarette research was probably one of my
You have
main
a
streams.
lot. You have a
Yeah.
lot of auctions in here, and is that funding driven? The money was there. So I mean, I guess some of the auction related stuff, right, is you have to wait for the results to come in terms of like analyzing stuff. So like,
Yeah.
you're able to do multiple auctions and
Yeah,
participate with multiple people?
for getting into experiments was at the time I got into it, it was a really, really good field in the sense you have to put in a lot of time to craft an experiment and then you run it. But you then instantly have the data.
Yeah.
You know, if you're at least if you're the grad student and you're entering things in, and if you design an experiment correctly, you should have you should be designing it so you have more than one thing you can look at. That that's not just one particular strain, one paper you can get from this. So a lot of the experiments that I've conducted have resulted in multiple
Hmm.
papers. The that's that's how I ended up getting into it, and I felt like I was able to be way more productive than I would have been if it was digging up a new data set each time and figuring out how is this data set look, what does it look like, and how do I clean it, and and then it's not an experimental one, so it might not answer the other questions you want. Experiments allowed a pretty good opportunity to get into that, and I am still actually doing that. And it's ironic we're talking about this today, but on Saturday I have a couple students who are going to a grocery store to actually conduct experiments
That's great.
on some stuff. So still into it, but you're right, it's not my mainstream anymore.
Yeah. How influential was Vernon Smith winning the Nobel Prize? Because he had won, I guess, right before you had started in this
No, it's
space.
right after.
Oh, right after.
So
Okay.
it's kind of cool. It was a bit validating,
Yeah.
and that he won in 2002,
Hmm.
right?
Your first paper, well, according to Google Scholar, is 2003. Well,
Yeah, but so I
you got some
graduated.
working
They were
papers.
under review. It was the first submission was of that stuff, and actually that
Mhm.
wasn't the one. The first submission was late 2001, and I got my doctorate in 2002. I don't know if it's officially June or December. I defended successfully in late
Mhm.
June.
Was
I
your dissertation in experimental econ?
yes,
Those
yes.
are you did a three paper probably.
It was a full one. It was a
Okay.
full, but from that, I think I literally got about 8 or 9 or 10 papers. So
That has got to be so cool to be doing experimental economics, getting a PhD in it, and then like the Nobel Prize winner is experimental economics.
it adds a lot of validity. And well, then I went on the market 2 years after I got my doctorate. So I was at RTI for 2 years and then left. And certainly, if somebody gets a Nobel Prize for it, it does add some validity.
Mhm.
And coming to a place like Susquehanna, I'm not sure what everybody was thinking, but they all knew the Nobel Prize just went to somebody in experimental economics. And then I come in and it probably said, oh, okay, well, we know this field, and this is in some ways got a seal of approval by the Nobel Committee that this is a very legitimate field for people to be doing work in.
Do you feel like you miss the so I've always found like food labels or just like I guess late economics of labeling really interesting because exactly what you said. I went to an ag econ program.
Yep.
My advisor does a lot of stuff in the organic labeling value type stuff. So I've always found it really interesting. But do you feel like I guess do you miss that part of it? You don't, I mean, the experiments that you do now are much more in the public health space when you do them.
Yeah.
They're not in the ag econ space. So do you miss the ag
No.
econ side of stuff?
I don't miss necessarily doing things with food products. I still feel like I'm in touch with that space because experimental auctions is such a big part of that space.
Yeah.
And some of what we're doing, and actually there's a project I'm working on now that I don't even necessarily want to talk about. I'll share it later. But project I'm working on with a couple different people that we're targeting an ag econ journal for it.
Great.
So it's with having to do with experimental auctions as well. The joy of sabbatical. But no, I don't know that I don't know that I missed doing that. It's interesting. And if other things come up, I guess I always viewed myself as an economist working on interesting projects more than the specialized. And I don't know, your research is more sports, like a lot
I
of
mean,
it's
sports
sports
or
and then
pedagogy.
pop
Yeah.
and then pedagogy.
Yeah.
I think there is value in the profession of really getting known as the total
Mhm.
expert in one area.
Yeah.
And in many ways, I think experiments was kind of the area that I've become really known in. But pivot to what I find interesting, where there's money, uh,
Mhm.
and I don't know. It's just fun. I can't definitely don't regret doing that though.
Well, here's an easy bridge. Do you feel comfortable talking about the MBER paper that you have on auctions and Cutthroat Kitchen?
Oh
Because
yeah,
I'm
sure.
gonna pivot into pop culture, so
Yeah, of
I feel
course,
like
of course.
this is
It's
almost a
on
perfect one.
NBER. Yeah, I
Right.
should
So
give
let
it
me.
a little.
I'll read the title for everybody. This is Matt is part of a group of co-authors that has a National Bureau of Economic Research. It's a big working paper series in our field, MBER, called "Money Isn't Everything: Estimating the Prestige Value of Winning Cutthroat Kitchen
Yeah.
from Overbidding and Sabotage Auctions." And so, those of you who don't know Matt, this is I think this is like a perfect bridge because Matt was, even though I keep saying was an experimental economist. You're an experimental economist. Did a lot of that at the beginning, but Matt does a lot of pop culture stuff now. And so it is real. I think my favorite stuff is when you do get these overlaps. So when I have like teaching sports economics papers,
Yeah.
those are my favorite ones. So Matt, can you talk about that paper? What y'all did, what you found, why it was an
Yeah,
interesting
this was
question.
a fascinating collaboration. As worked on this, a student worked on some stuff with Cutthroat Kitchen and the economics of Cutthroat Kitchen and she presented. I brought her down to Florida to present at the Cengage 2016, that fall Econ Ed conference that they have.
Mhm.
And she presented that some economic lessons from Cutthroat Kitchen. But at the same time was also looking at this idea of the bidding and what would influence somebody's bid within the auction was kind of the part of this. Chris Snyder, this is an Ivy League economist. Ivy League economists don't reach out to people at Susquehanna about things. Was saying uh, he and Meg is actually Chris's daughter, who's now a PhD student, I believe at Harvard. I'm not 100% on that.
Yale, according to MBER.
She's at Yale. I think Yale was her undergrad. I think
Oh,
she's
okay.
actually, I'm pretty certain, but, and she, they had this idea. They wanted to do that, but they wanted to see what we had. And
Mhm.
I said, we've started some of the data collection, a pretty nice data set. We went through every single episode. And by we, I mean my grad student or my undergrad student, my
Yeah.
RA, who is also Dan Bragan. He's a PhD student now at Clemson. And when I'm talking to Chris, I have no illusions here. Like, okay, comparative advantage wise, we can get you the data and a
Yeah.
good data set. We have a lot of it already. We've thought about it conceptually. In terms of the intellectual modeling, like the economic modeling, I can't do this stuff anymore. This isn't my wheelhouse. And so this was our trades, our trade-off here. I think on the idea parts of it, um, I can keep up with them, but it was a really good trade. So we collected data. The goal is to figure out when you win Cutthroat Kitchen, which is a show where four chefs are competing against each other. Have you ever watched Cutthroat Kitchen, by the way?
Yes, I've seen it.
Okay,
I don't watch it. I love
regularly.
Food Network. Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah.
But you've seen it. So, but
Yes.
for the audience, four chefs come out and they each get 25,000 in a briefcase as they come out. The winner gets to leave with their 25,000. But this differs from some other cooking shows in that you can, if you are one of the chefs, bid on sabotages to sabotage the other chefs using part of the money. Now, the catch is you only get to go home with the money left in your briefcase at the end of the day. So the if people only cared about the money, there would be an optimal amount to bid that you could figure out, right? Like, what's the probability of winning multiplied by the amount you would receive, the amount left over, should you win? And there's an optimal amount of bidding. For example, you shouldn't bid all $25,000 because then your expected value is indeed zero. So there's an optimal amount for bidding, but then winning also would have a prestige value. So what is the prestige value of winning? And the way we estimated this was by estimating we looked at the very last round of Cutthroat Kitchen and what's the
Mhm.
probability if you sabotage somebody else versus you're sabotaged, and there's some probability differences in winning if you make it to the last two, to figure out what would be the profit maximizing amount somebody should be bidding in the last round. And that amount's quite a bit lower than the actual amount that people are bidding, which is indicating to us that indeed there is a prestige value of winning, which is kind of cool.
Mhm.
I mean, there's prestige in a lot of things, between job titles to winning awards to winning a TV show, right? I mean, if you win a TV show, it's not just the cash you receive. You were on Food Network in a
Yes.
competition and you won it.
Mhm.
I mean, you could always say this, right? And that has value. So that was a really cool collaboration. And you're right, it's kind of the intersection of pop culture and auctions.
It's almost like too nice of an intersection, right, for you. So, Matt,
Crazy.
I've always known you as a pop culture guy. I think we've tried to figure this out when we met. I don't know the answer, but I think it's probably around. I know where we met. We met at a C Tree in Minneapolis, I believe.
That sounds
Uh,
about right. I was going to guess Tree, Minneapolis, but
I
it could
definitely
have been
remember
before.
meeting you at that C
Yeah.
Tree in Minneapolis. That would have been 2015. I
Okay.
feel very confident saying that's where we met because I graduated in 2014. And
Okay.
so if I graduated in 2014, I would have started my job in 2014. So the first C tree I would have gone to with like real funding would have been C tree
2015.
2015 in Minneapolis. And so
Yeah.
like I know I definitely met you in Minneapolis.
Sure,
So
sure.
I'm gonna say that was the first time we met each other. And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I was introduced to you though at the time. And I guess you could tell me if you were doing Broadway stuff at that time or not. But I was introduced to you as a teaching pedagogy pop culture economist.
Gosh, I don't think
Maybe
back then I really would have been much of that by that point in time. I I don't know when the Broadway site launched.
I
Might
got
have been
well, it was
around,
published in 2016.
yeah.
The
Okay.
JEE article was
Yeah, so it would
2016.
have been 2015 then, I guess. That the site would have probably gone live in 2015. So that makes sense. Um,
Oh. You know what? I'm looking at some of the stuff that you've published, and I wonder if this was what you presented. I think you might have been talking about, your presentation might have been about sort of the ethics of using money in classroom experiments.
Yeah,
I think
we've
that's what you would have presented.
I presented on did a project. I don't even know about ethics as much as was it effective. I think
I think you
more
did effective, but I think some of the conversation was around the ethics of it.
that could have been true. That, yeah, we did some on Great Expectations, some other pedagogy research as well. So when I went to my first C tree, and I am an experimentalist, is the way I'm thinking of myself, and I'm seeing a lot of the stuff that's done. I think I kind of know how to run an experiment to get good results, and people aren't doing that. And that was, so I thought, hey, this is an area I can get into. I can kind of dive into this area where so that was a fun paper where on the several people across several universities ran a
Hmm.
classroom with prisoner's dilemma games that either were completely hypothetical or gave money or didn't include the game with other participants to see how much did the money matter. Or did having real money matter
Yeah.
in this case? So that was a fun one, but I think we designed it very well, at least
Hmm.
especially compared to what was happening at the time. Now there's this whole new ENE, I think, EENE.
Hmm.
And they actually brought me, they didn't bring me, they invited me to, of course, pay to go down to Atlanta, but to present, as I think ours was one of the first studies that did what they're hoping to do, which is have teams of people across
Yeah.
institutions run experiments. So that, yeah, it was 2012 was my first C tree. So you think 2015 was your first Minneapolis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so then I'm curious, what transitioned you away? So I'm looking at your list of publications, and it looks like, and I could be wrong, but it looks
Yeah.
like your first education related paper is Do Monetary Incentives Matter in Classroom Experiments: Effects on Course Performance, published in the JEE in 2015.
Yeah.
It looks like, I think that's your first econ ed publication.
That makes sense.
I'm
Yes.
trying to, yeah,
I guess I had one where I wrote out an experiment called the football play calling experiment,
okay.
and it was in a very low ranked journal. It's
Mhm.
published somewhere. I mean, but I think you're fair to say that though.
Yeah. So this is, I guess, my question is, what got you interested in the education side of things? If I look at the papers that are right before this,
Yeah.
deception in economics research, fracking, genetically modified foods, warning label on cigarettes,
Yep.
experimental auctions, future consumption, smokeless tobacco, right? All the years before this, no education. I guess
Sure.
is it really just that you had gone to a C tree before, said, I could do this well, then maybe my question is,
Yeah.
why'd you go to that C tree in 2012?
Why did I go to the C tree in 2012? I mean, it was a teaching conference and I'm at a teaching institution, and I guess I thought maybe I could learn something.
It
I think
wasn't the first C tree. The
no,
first C tree was
second C tree.
2011. It was the
Yep.
second one. So
So
perhaps maybe you heard about it, the 2011 one, and said, I'll
somehow,
go.
or it came out, it somehow got on my radar. It was shortly after I got back from a semester in London, the one semester I did in London with our family. And this
It was in
C3
Boston.
was in Boston. I met Dirk and Lee with Jack Repchak, who the late Jack Repchak, who was amazing. Jack reached out to me, well, I stay another day and we'll pay for your room and expenses, and Dirk and Lee are going to put on some sessions,
Hmm.
and I'm like, yeah, sure. And I went there, I had fun. I don't I always think of myself first as an economist more than anything
Hmm.
else. And so this is economics research, and I thought this is neat. I'm thinking I have ideas I could do. In my game theory class, I have them throw money in at the beginning of the
Yeah.
term. And I thought there could be something fun to do here. So I started thinking through and found some people who were willing to jump
Well, I
on
guess
paper, and
since you're not in this space normally, how did you get people to buy in? So I know you, I mean, you publish with
yeah,
Jay, and I know you and Jay publish a lot of stuff together. Jay Corrigan is
yep,
a frequent co-author of Matt's. How did
yep,
you get the other people on there just by the last names? As I could tell, you have Becky on there, you have Jill Hader, Seth Hauser, I think is a colleague of Becky's,
yep.
and I don't remember who D
Honestly,
Harris
I'm
is.
sure all of them were met at C Tree or similar conferences.
They're C-tree people for
Yep,
sure.
yep,
I mean,
yeah.
I recognize just their last name from stuff.
Yeah. And so no,
Is
I'm sure that
okay.
was it. We're at the C tree. I was mentioning I have an idea. I'm pretty certain we could get this published. It'll be interesting, and
Mhm.
pitch the idea, and people agreed, and we went ahead and did that. The Broadway Econ site, I thought the sites that were up at the time, and I can't remember what all was up at that time, but
Not much.
I know
Not
those
much.
Dirk was putting like some of the stuff was on Critical Commons,
Hmm.
and then the yada 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 econ. I think Economics of the
Hmm.
Office might have been out by then. The At least, and I thought, what could I contribute to this? And I was like, well, I love Broadway shows, and some of the songs definitely have themes. And I decided um, that would be a good contribution. That would be a public good, right?
Hmm.
It's costly to produce, so it would be underprovided in general in the market. Once it's produced, though, it's free for anybody to enjoy the benefits of, and hopefully instructors would enjoy the benefits of it. So that's how I ended up getting into the idea of, is there a way to teach using pop culture as well on those? And I never felt like I would give up the other work. What ended up then happening is I became a dean, and I
Hmm.
kind of had to give up a fair amount, like most of my scholarship, had to be given up.
That so I'm not saying you're wrong. Like you've definitely
Yeah.
slowed down, but just for some context, Matt I think is being Matt is an incredibly productive researcher, and so even as Matt is sitting here going, I had to give some stuff up. He did have four publications in 2021 across
Yeah.
ag
Yeah.
econ and health econ. To be fair, you only had one in 2022.
Yeah.
You didn't have any in 2023, so maybe that's actually your slowing down moment. When did you become dean? You've been dean
In
it's
May of
2019,
2017, May of
17.
2017. But
Okay, so
there's
I'm
an
gonna go.
inertia. Projects are started,
There
and I
is.
still did a bit.
Yeah,
Like I think some of the 2021 is work with a undergrad student. Like that
yeah.
was so. Yeah, I'm still. I mean, I didn't completely shut down,
I
but
think you could definitely tell the slowdown, and then there's the weight. This is what Matt was saying is there's
yeah,
inertia in the sense that like econ is very slow to publish,
sure.
just
Yep.
period. So while there are four things in 2021, some of those could have been submitted in 2019, submitted in 2020. So I think
Yeah.
actually my guess is probably that's what it is this sort of slowdown is you only have one published in 2019, but realistically, like some of those things are just got pushed down. You were doing less, and so the inertia is making it more jagged rather
Yeah.
than when you were doing
I'm
a lot, it
looking.
was smoother.
It's funny because the Juul e-cigarette one, that research was pretty much done before 2017. I'm looking at this
Hmm.
scholar now. The other three were actually all done after. Now, the international internships paper, that was that was not like diving in. That was I, I don't mean to insult the paper. I mean the paper. I think it's a good paper. I wouldn't have written it if I thought it was a good paper. But I mean, a sub, that could be an extended Substack post, right? I
Hmm.
mean, we were writing on why these are valuable. We were looking at the literature on this, and we're talking about internships and why it's valuable to set up, and we put that in there. So that wasn't digging into data. The using music to teach, that one was just a lot of fun, and I reached out to Mark because he runs Econ Gone Country. I didn't know him, but I'm like, I have this idea, and you do the country one, and the country's got to have a lot of ag econ in it. That was literally, it wasn't quite worded that way, but that was essentially the email to
Yeah.
say, within your country, you have to know the topics behind this. And then Bailey Hackenberry is one of my students, so that was the herd immunity one. Nick is a friend at Susquehanna University in political science department, and then Jay Corrigan, and we just started to chit chat about it would be really cool to figure out what people would need to be paid to get a COVID shot if they would
Mhm.
resist.
That one's fun.
And then
Uh,
yeah, but we couldn't get access to that, so we had to well, we did it with a flu shot, and that was pretty interesting. We tried to publish it right away, and then we actually more valuable than that publication, I think, is we wrote out several op-eds
mhm.
in pretty nice places. I think Barron's might have published one of them. I can't remember if the Washington Post ran one on that. I maybe not, but we had some good publications. So.
Also, I have two following questions to wrap up our time together.
Cool.
Um, this is going to come across as mean, and I don't mean this in a mean
Okay.
way. And then I'll ask you the nicer one maybe second. Matt, I decided to sort your publications by citations,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
then I scrolled to the bottom to see which ones have never been cited. Obviously, there's like a lot of working papers and all sorts of stuff. However, I think I found one that has never been cited from
Hmm.
2008, and I'm curious if you could give it some love. on the podcast. It is testing whether field auction experiments are demand revealing in practice. You published in the Journal of Agricultural Resource Economics back in
Really? That
2008
one
with
didn't.
Jay.
Huh.
But you could have, there might be multiple versions. You might not have them like merged. Oh no, never mind. That one has been cited 94 times.
Yeah, I was
You,
gonna say,
sorry.
I'm really surprised if that one has
You
none. That one
you
won the award
it's,
from that organization.
there's multiple versions.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, let's skip that one. Let me scroll a little bit more. No, that's an appendix. Okay, let's see if this might be the only consumers. No. Yeah, Matt, you really need to clean up you need to clean up your Google Scholar. Okay, this one is the lowest one. So I'm searching. So you have a lot of double entries
Yeah,
and stuff. Okay, this is the lowest one that is not entered in here twice. You
sure.
published this in the Gaming Law Review and Economics back in 2010. What impacts a poker player's earnings? Evidence from a survey of online poker players.
That was a lot of fun. Yeah, and that's probably apparently not the
but
best journal.
but only one
Um,
person has cited this.
the
Tell me about the
that pa
paper.
that paper was awesome. It was well, exactly what it says. I was active in an internet forum. I used to play poker, online quite a bit, and there was an internet poker forum that I was part of, ITH. It no longer exists, and I saw Michael Smith he was a colleague in the psychology department. He left Susquehanna, gosh, probably over a decade ago now for a non-academic job, and I know I saw him. He was into risky behavior research.
Mhm.
And so I was talking to him and I'm like, I bet I could get a data set on this. Would you be interested in trying to publish something? So we surveyed people. What I found very fascinating is the number one thing that affected the online poker players' earnings, is how much time they spent working, studying the game.
Hmm.
So, which is kind of interesting in a couple ways. One, it's somewhat what you would expect. Two, it is extra evidence that, oh yeah, poker indeed is very much is a game of skill in
Yeah.
terms of long run performance. So
But it's so I don't know. I'm always that's an interesting finding, right? That this is
fun.
not just sort of a random. There's a human capital element to it, and so I did like the one. I'm actually going to give you some props on this too. You published a poker paper 2 years later, Internet Poker, examining motivations, behaviors, outcomes, and player traits using structural equation analysis, and you did
Yeah.
not cite yourself. Because your What Impacts a Poker Player's Earning paper only has one citation, according to Google Scholar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that one citation is Emerging Issues in Gaming Law, a call for scholars. So somebody
Huh.
said, hey, this is an interesting paper that somebody's
Yeah.
done. You didn't even cite yourself.
I don't know why we didn't. I'm normally pretty good about self-citing, right? I mean,
And your co-author was the co-author on the second one
yeah,
too.
yeah, it was the same data set. And then we added Paul Dion to it as well, and he was the structural equations guy. So
Yeah.
I don't know what we were thinking. Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
I always think about I have an Excel sheet that tracks like citations so that I have it as an easy place to sort of easily find links and when I published it and
Mhm.
stuff like that. And sometimes I go back and I look at the stuff that has like no citations to it, and I'm just sitting there going, is there a paper that I can write that I can cite myself in
You
this
want
to
to
sort
cite it,
of to bring it some attention,
boost that.
boost that
I
number
haven't looked
up?
through these papers in a while. Like, yeah, a
As
lot
I
of these
said,
papers have gotten some good love. That's nice to see.
yeah, you need to clean up you need to edit your page and start merging some of these stuff together.
I should do that. I
It's very
definitely
easy.
should do that.
Well, so I wanted to end with my final question for you is there a paper that you wish people like knew about you that maybe wasn't your most popular one? So is there
Hmm.
one that like you're really proud about that you think is super fascinating, doesn't get the love that you think it deserves?
It's interesting. I don't know for sure
Okay.
what I should be saying on this, like in terms of what paper really is most
Is it?
deserving. In terms of, honestly, I think looking through here, the paper on the herd immunity at what price, what people are paid for the flu vaccine, for that only to be cited 4 times when the
Yeah.
payments, the resistance to me, I'm like, gosh, I mean, Preventive Medicine Reports is a pretty credible journal. I would have liked that to have been more, but I'll take a different route. The main thing I think my dissertation did, the main advance, was figuring out how to place a value on information in an experiment.
Mhm.
And really more in general. Some others had tried to do this, but so how much can you value information from an experiment? And the value of information isn't from the bid price. Somebody's bid price might change. That's not the value of information because somebody could get information, become better informed, and decide to bid less for something. You're not saying the information had a negative value. The way we estimated the value of information is by estimating how many people would have are making a different purchase. So before they were fully informed, they make some purchase that's really suboptimal if they're changing. Once they become better informed, they make a decision that's better. And you could look at, okay, well, what's the lost surplus that they have because they were really buying a set of goods that weren't the optimal set of goods for them. That was, we kind of figured out how to do that. That was kind of the dissertation research. And the number two paper on my, the Google Scholar from Economic Inquiry, which we tried to send to all the top places. And, that one took a lot of years, but effects and value of verifiable information. It's been cited, I'm no, almost 300 times might be pushing it, but we're we're getting there. But I still think that result is very, very cool. And so I will say that that one should have more. I don't know.
I
Should
like it.
have more. But no, thanks. Appreciate it. It's fun to talk about this stuff and think about some papers I haven't thought about for a while.
You got fun papers.
It's fun. I love, we love being economists, right? We love economics, and part of the fun of the research is I have been part of why I've loved to be at Susquehanna with the research is they value all sorts of different research.
Mhm.
So I could come in and think, you know what? I think I want my research this year to be doing stuff with poker players and what drives whether they're earning money, and then change to say I want to go into pedagogy research and public health versus ag econ and all of that. And yeah, it's just fun to be an economist. So
I like it. All right, Matt, that's all the questions I have for you.
okay, so the so we dove into your research,
Mhm.
last time. I appreciate going into getting to dive into mine. Do you have any pop culture clips to share for today? I could share one based on what we've talked about today. That if you're
Yeah, I don't.
while you think. So,
Let me think. I'm sure I
okay.
have something.
So the one we talked about Cutthroat Kitchen,
Mhm.
and I did put a clip. Gosh, I put it on 8 years ago. I think I have more clips that I'll need to put on to Critical Commons because I think I have some shorter Cutthroat Kitchen clips I can include. But there's a nice clip within Cutthroat Kitchen of why are people choosing to give sabotages to particular people. And the clip is pretty
Mhm.
fascinating because there's examples in here that don't seem like they are strictly based on maximizing my probability to win. There's a case there with a couple of different ladies who are on this, and one of them is saying, "I'm gonna wipe the smile off a little cute little blondie's face," like they upset about one of Then there's questions on is it discrimination? There's questions on if somebody gets a sabotage one time, are they going to get revenge and spite? Like I'm going to earn the sabotage and I'm getting back at that
Mhm.
person. It's not necessarily all profit maximizing behavior. It's where the behavioral influences take over. So that one is on Critical Commons if anybody wants to explore. I think it's titled Cutthroat Kitchen Bias, Screening, and Spite. Um,
Well, I do. I actually do have one. It is not my research at all. It was a research idea that I had in grad school, and then somebody I started to work on it, and then a publication came out that was about the same thing. So, did you ever
okay.
watch the TV show, the game show Cash Cab?
I have seen clips from
Yep.
it, so
Okay.
I know what it is. Yeah.
So, for anybody listening who has not seen Cash Cab, it is a game show with Bill Bailey as the host. I mean, it's staged, but in essence, somebody gets into a cab and they're on a game show, and they're driving to their destination, and they have to answer questions. If they get too many questions wrong, they get kicked out of the cab. If they answer questions right, they earn money.
Yeah.
And so I was real pumped about it in grad school, and I was like, this is a great chance to study like risk aversion and decision making. Like, do
Yeah.
how risky are you in terms of, because so I guess at each time after each question they say, do you want to stop and get out of the cab now with the money you have, or do you want to keep playing? And so I've
Yeah.
always found it, I was really fascinated by it, and I really wanted to look at gender issues of just like, do women perform differently on the game than men and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But
Somebody
in
beat you to it.
somebody beat me to it in 2012 in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization.
Jibo.
Out came a in Jibo, out came a paper called Decision Making and Risk Aversion in Cash Cab.
Okay.
To be fair, they did not focus on gender differences, and I feel like this show is so old now that it probably doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
They looked at group decision making versus individual decision making because you could get in to the cab with your friends, and are you riskier as a group versus as an individual? Was their focus of the paper, and they found I'll read the line. Risk aversion estimates indicate that when participants are part of a group, they focus on the overall size of the dollar amount that are at risk rather than their slice of the pie. So they are trying to work together to grow the money without thinking about their individual amount. So
Interesting. I didn't watch Cash Cab much, but you reminded me of a show, and I'm thinking, why didn't I think of was there any econ in it? Maybe it was my pre thinking through
mhm.
ideas for pedagogy. It probably was, but I think because when the kids were little, this was something we'd watch in the bedroom. So we'd put them to bed and we'd need to be on the upstairs level. And we watched a little bit more TV then because, you put them to bed at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock.
Mhm.
There was a show called Repo Games. Did you ever see that? It is the worst,
No.
trashiest game that I can't believe that I'm like, it's just so horrible. But
Uh, but it was on. It
the
was
general idea behind it, do you know of this at all?
no. It sounds like there used to be a show about people buying storage units, like Storage Wars is what it comes to mind at first, but I know that that's not it.
I think this has got to be worse than that because somebody's going to have their car repossessed. So the
Okay.
repo guy shows up, but he shows up with the camera team. So we're going to repossess your car unless you want to participate. And if you get 3 of 5 questions right, we pay the car off and it's free and clear.
Hmm.
And so they come up, the car goes, they put the car, and I mean, strategically, of course, by doing this, then they get the car on
Yeah.
the machinery, which has to be the biggest challenge if you're the repo guy. Um, when I say repo guy, it was always repo guys there. But that then they ask the various questions. I don't really know that there's econ in it, but it reminds me of the various. You mentioned the cash cab. That is, I don't even know if that's on. That has to be one of the sleaziest shows I ever watched in my life. But a little bit of econ in there for our
I like it.
crazy. Any closing thoughts? How was the cucumber slushy?
It's no longer slushy.
Okay.
It is not as sour as I remember it being. So it was not that slushy. I got some slushy parts.
Okay.
It's very good. It's very light. It
Yeah.
actually tastes more like a cucumber dill. There is definitely a sour component to it, but more like a lager in that
Okay.
space.
Very cool. Very cool. The wine was
Listen, you like the lime lagers, like the Mexican lagers. You've
I'm not
enjoyed
a
those.
cucumber fan in general though, so I don't know
This
that
could be a little too weird.
that could be a little bit too much. I might try it just to add it to the app, but the that might be about it. Well, thank you to everybody for tuning in. And as a reminder, we would love to hear your topics for what we should cover. So please leave us a comment or shoot us an email or shoot us a text if you have our cell numbers. And the any closing words of wisdom?
I got none.
Okay. Well, until next time, everybody, thank you for listening and cheers.
Cheers, Matt.
Oops. Stop.